Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm going to call to order this Perrysburg Board of Education special meeting on Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. Mr. Druyer, roll call, please.
Ms. Roland Miller.
Here.
Ms. Larimer.
Here.
Ms. Minke.
Here.
Dr. Reffert.
Here.
Mr. Bennington.
I am here. I ask that we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, as is our custom when we have guests in the public here, we will start with the safety briefing. Perrysburg Schools welcomes you to the Commodore Building, and we thank you for attending tonight's Board of Education meeting. We care about the safety of our students, staff, families, and guests. Please note that there are exits on both the east and west sides of the cafeteria. In case of an emergency, an AED is located outside the cafeteria doors. You are located at 140 East Indiana Avenue. Thank you for joining us tonight and supporting Perrysburg Schools. All right, first order of business, can I have a motion to adopt the proposed agenda?
So moved. Second.
Ms. Larimer and Ms. Menke. Roll call, please.
Ms. Larimer.
Yes.
Ms. Minke.
Yes.
Dr. Reffert.
Yes.
Ms. Roland Miller. Yes. Mr. Bennington.
Yes, proposed agenda is accepted. So that takes us into Mr. Drury and Mr. Hostler's superintendent's report.
Well, thank you. Appreciate everybody making themselves available today. It's certainly a somber special meeting that we're having, and so we'll jump right into the presentation. Just kind of a statement that we wanted to share at the beginning. While we remain committed to ensuring all students achieve their greatest potential, we also have to be prepared for the possibility of losing $13.5 million in funding if the levy fails. The resolution presented to the Board of Education outlines a balanced approach to manage the financial shortfall while prioritizing student safety and preserving the unique Perrysburg educational experience. We're also ensuring the school district maintains the necessary cash reserve to operate in the coming year. So let me be clear. None of the cuts in this plan are in the best interests of our students, families, staff, or community. Every position in our district is connected to a student, and behind each role is a person who has made a difference. We have something special in Perrysburg, and we are working hard to protect it. Some may call this plan a threat. It is not. It's about being honest with our community. If the levy doesn't pass, these are the realities we'll face together. It's about the future of our schools and the programs that shape students' lives. We owe it to our community and voters to be transparent, to face tough decisions, and to ensure everyone understands what's at stake. And that's our goal this evening, is to review this information. So we're here tonight to discuss a contingency plan. So on November 5th, I'm not sure if you're aware, but there is an election that's happening in the community and across the country. And what's at stake is a levy is expiring, and we know that with a failure of that levy, we will lose $13.5 million. The school year spans 2 calendar years. And tax years, of course, are based on a single year. And that's a calendar year. So if the levy fails this November, that means starting on January 1, the current levy that is expiring that results in $13.5 million would no longer be collected. So that is what is causing this conversation to take place. If it is passed in that next year, the way that taxes work, it would not go on the books until the next year, which would be 2026. So for 2025, there would be $13.5 million that would not be collected, that would be gone. And so how do we fill that gap? And so we've been working to come up with a solution to do that. A couple things. This is a proposed 8-year operational levy. And so over those 8 years, I wanted to highlight that the expectation of the Board of Education through the conversations that we've had, leading up to putting this on the ballot, was that there would not be another operational ballot during those 8 years. So that was very clear in those conversations, and I think it's important to note that as we move forward. So we do have a 5-year permanent improvement levy that is set to expire next year, and that has been renewed, which means no new taxes every 5 years since 1980. So that would be something that would be possibly appearing on the ballot next year if the board were to choose that, and if the board were to follow the path that has been done, since 1980, it would be a renewal. So I think that's important. I think the other thing that we want to point out as well is that this is an operating levy. We have a lot of confusion in the community regarding what type of levy that this is. We've fielded phone calls wanting information about the bond issue. This is not a bond issue. This is an operational levy. This goes towards keeping our lights on, our buses, on the road. It keeps our staff in the buildings. So this is not about construction or buildings or any of those kinds of things. This is about, doing what we're doing today, and what we do today, obviously, we do very well. This is how schools are funded in Ohio. And since 1976, when House Bill 920 went in effect, which was a circuit breaker, which changed how schools did taxes, there have been more than 12,000 school levies in Ohio. So this isn't a Perrysburg thing, but this is a thing that in Ohio, school districts have one lever to seek more funds, and it's through going to voters. So how much it will cost taxpayers? So already taxpayers are paying the roughly 9.75 mils that is expiring. So when we talk about what is the additional cost of this levy, this is what we're explaining here. And the projected maximum cost of this issue, if it passes, is an additional $4.20 per 100,000 of appraised home value per month beginning in year 2 of the levy, and an additional $4.20 per month per $100,000 of appraised home value in each of the following 6 years. So that is how an incremental levy works. We set a dollar amount, this board did, each year, and then the taxes are adjusted to collect that dollar amount. There's a couple of things that we wanted to point out. One is that as the community grows, and we'll spend a little more time talking through this, the millage that is needed, the taxes that are collected from residents goes down from what was projected. And we'll explain how that happens. In fact, the levy that is expiring, based on the millage that was set to be collected when it was on the ballot, was 6 mils. The amount of mills that was actually collected was less than 2 over those 5 years, because as more people come to the district, it's spread out. So 69% of what was projected was actually collected at the end of that levy because of that reason. And in the second year, so the first year there's no change in taxes. The second year, as the $4.20 goes on, and that $4 represents an amount as if nothing would change in the district, not another home, not another business or anything like that. In the second year, as that would go on the books, we are retiring $5.39 per month per $100,000 because we're paying off the bond at the high school. So the net feel, when you factor the bond issue going away at a higher rate than what this levy would be projected going on, the real feel of that net is obviously less than what they're paying the previous year. So the incremental levy is a little bit different, and I'm sorry to post this picture at dinner time, and it is a margarita pizza. So, but let's say this is a way that we've tried to explain how an incremental levy works. So after this board meeting, we have 10 people that walk across the street to Fifth Street Pub, and they order 10 pizzas. And it's $10 a pizza. And when they order, they know how much that bill is going to be for that pizza. It's going to $100. So while they're there at the table waiting for the pizza, 4 more people text them and say, hey, we're coming, save us a seat. So now there's 14 people at the table. So when the pizzas come, everybody eats some delicious pizza. But when the bill comes, it's still $100. But instead of 10 people paying that, now 14 people are paying it. So instead of $10 per person, it's now $7.14. And that's what happens in a growing community when you have an incremental levy. And this chart really represents the pizza. So the black bars that are here is what the bill would be if only 10 people showed up and had the pizza. So this is what was on the ballot language, the black bars that are here. The gold bars represent what people actually paid. So what that shows is that during each of those years, more people were coming to the table and joining in, eating the pizza, and then most importantly, paying the bill. So I think that's very important for us to keep in mind. So to kind of make that stretch from, how this works, and then to say, okay, this is actually how it worked. And so when we begin to talk about how much this will cost moving forward, I think it's important to understand how that, kind of the fundamentals of that. So we have a chart here showing a couple of different things, and I'll kind of walk you through. So the first column are the years of the levy that it'll be collected. And you'll notice that first year is 0, because we won't collect anything different than what we are now. So the first year of this incremental levy, there's no change in what people are paying. So in year 2, it shows $4.20 an increase. So the county auditor is in a tough situation with incremental levies because they have to project out 8 years with actual numbers. So what happens is they look at the valuation of the community today, and they say, based on the number of homes and businesses that are in our community today, how much will it cost a taxpayer to raise that amount in each of the years for the next 8 years? And so they're using that number of what is the valuation today, projecting that out over the next 8 years. We just showed you how it actually played out in the last 5 years, because each year we've grown. Each year the valuation of the community has grown, businesses and homes coming to Perrysburg. So that second column really represents the maximum of what it would take to raise that money, as if no other house was built or added in Perrysburg during that time, no other business or anything. So that's what that represents there. So the next column, the third column here from the left, what we did is we said, if the trend, the growth rate that we experienced in the last 5 years is applied to the next 8 years, what could that mean in terms of that $4.20? And you can begin to see where it begins to fall. And that represents a more realistic, real feel of what that could be. And then in the second column from the right, that minus $64.69 a year represents the bond issue coming off, and that's $5.39. So you see that annual, going away because we're done paying for that. And in the far right column, it shows what that difference is from what people are paying today. So when you look at year 1, it's 0. When you look at year 2, the annual difference would be a negative $16.81 if we grow like we have in the past. And then you can begin to see where that, so in the last year, the additional accumulative amount that you're paying would be $192 a year, and that's 8 years from now. And so this kind of gives you a breakdown of how that would work.
And Tom, if I may interject.
Yeah.
that column with the estimated based on a trend, I want to point one thing out on that. We used the 5-year trend that we just came off of with one exception. We're going to assume within this time frame, we're going to have an update year and a reappraisal year within 8 years, but they're not going to be as large as what we just went through. So this is actually, I think, a fairly balanced approach, that we're not going to have that huge increase like we had in the last year in reappraisal, right? Where our millage actually, effective millage actually dropped, but our collection went up. So I just want to be clear on that. And another thing we want to be clear, these are our estimates. The county auditor only can do that second column, right? So I don't want to mislead anyone that these are our estimates based on the trend that we've seen.
Yeah. No, thanks. So, so we're on the ballot because a 5-year incremental levy is set to expire on December 31st. Residents today are paying 9.75 mils already. And the additional that we're paying, that we're looking at adding, if this is approved, is 1.44 mils, and that will begin in year 2 of this. So if you go to the auditor's website and you punch in the information to do the calculator, and we certainly are grateful for that. One of the things that we've gotten some questions, I know Randy's done a great job of fielding these, is that because this levy is expiring and the new one is coming on, it calculates the 9.75 that you're already paying and the 1.44. So the number you're getting represents that portion that you're already paying today and the additional 1.44. So that's why we're spending a little bit of time kind of walking through that, because I think that's an important fact of what people are already paying.
And actually, if you go on the calculator, next year they already have it adjusted to 9.73. Obviously, probably insignificant, but the point is, just right now, that even that in this time frame has gone down a little bit. And when the county auditor finishes their assessment for this year, adding the new construction in there, that could go down even further. So, but obviously we don't know what it is. We'll know after November 5th, as the case always is.
So a couple area school districts are on the ballot, and we just put this up to kind of talk through this. So you have Anthony Wayne, which is an operational levy. It's 5 years. Toledo Public Schools is doing a combo, which is a bond issue and operational, and you can see that it's for 5 years and 30 years. Springfield is doing an emergency operational, and it's a renewal, and that is a 10-year levy. And then Perrysburg is the existing 9.75 and then 1.44 mils new, and that's 8 years. So one of the things that we wanted to point out is that the length of a levy could be from 1 year to 10 years or continuing. And you see here the different lengths of times that just some of the area are doing right now, which is between 5 and 10 years in length, because it certainly gives districts an opportunity to plan and to do the kinds of things they need to do in 5 years versus 2 years or 4 years where you're on that loop of coming back to the voters. So I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind, because we have gotten some feedback that, no one has ever done an 8-year levy. No one does that. No one does ever, Perrysburg has always done a 4-year levy, which we have a 5-year levy that's expiring. So I don't know how you get there from here. But just to show you what some other districts are doing right now. And speaking of other districts, this November, 23% of Ohio school districts will be on the ballot in November. So going back from the last 4 years, 5 years in November elections only, there's a spring election, primary election, that's not included. So there's a whole nother slate of school district ballot issues that are on. And so I think it's important as we talk about, the way schools are funded in Ohio and trying to capture growth in a growing district is very challenging. And it's not a Perrysburg thing, but this is where districts have to go to raise additional funds. And it's not a great system, but it is the one that we have in Ohio. So I think it's important to look at, where that is. So why are we, continuing to look at, being on the ballot? And I think that we have new students, and this is kind of an interesting slide. We track where the new students come from that we received this year in Perrysburg. So we've had 81 students that have come to Perrysburg for this school year from out of state. We've had 27 that have come from out of the country. And then we have 5 that have come from homeschooling, 34 that have joined us from private schools. We have 3 that have come just since school started in kindergarten. So they didn't register, they moved in after the school year began. And then 82 from Ohio public schools. So, most, the history, and it's kind of an interesting thing that folks would be as many coming from out of state as they would from across the river or from other places in Ohio. So this isn't the net, but just to give you an idea of the number of new students and certainly where they're coming from. And of course, the last 5 years, we've added 635 students to the district. So during that time, that the incremental levy is a nice feature because it provides the funds at the time that we need it. And so each year when we're going up with the number of students, those dollars are there to help add those additional teachers, buy that additional bus, the additional Chromebooks, whatever is needed to help those students. Where's the end in sight with growth? So this is a map of Perrysburg schools. You can see the orange dash. And the tan, or the orange color is the developable land in the city. And then we also draw from the townships of Middleton and Perrysburg. And you can see in the purple where that area really has not been developed. So we understand that this is going to be a continuation. So we know how growth happens in the district, and we know that year after year you continue to see people moving in. And Perrysburg still has land to allow that to happen, not only just in the city, but also in the townships as well. Just this past month, the places with the most incoming investments, one of the bars that they had here was in Ohio. The number of new building permits being issued by county across the state of Ohio, Wood County was 8th. Was 8 out of 88 counties, and the only one in Northwest Ohio that was in the top 10. You can see that Columbus area obviously has 7 of, or 6 of the 10, 1 in the Cleveland area, and then 2 in the Cincinnati area, and then Wood County's the lone, and we know that Perrysburg is a driving force in, why people come here. So that's a little bit of a backstory with the what is happening, in the district, how the operational levy will work, and now we're going to move into what happens in the event that the levy fails. So we're going to walk folks through this, this plan, and so we'll begin with kind of going on the furthest area, reductions to the furthest away from our students. And as we go through the presentation, we'll get closer to those things that will impact students and the student experience the most. So as I mentioned at the beginning, if the levy fails on November 5th, that 9.75 mils that we're currently collecting will go away. And that generates approximately $13.5 million. So we will stop collecting that on January 1 of 2025. So if the board makes a decision to go back on the ballot the following year, or the board chooses not to, if the board says let's go back on the ballot and the community supports that levy next year, it won't go on the books until January 1 of 2026. So that year, we will lose a collection. So the idea, and we've had people ask the question, which we appreciate, well, if we vote this down and you come back to us during the primary and we pass that, you should be okay. And the answer is no. because that won't go on the books until the following year. So that is important to note, that that money is gone and it won't come back. And then the board, we're not sure if the board will decide then to go back on the ballot. We're not sure what the ballot issue will be. If it's less, then we know that we need to have a plan that provides some flexibility for the board. And if it's the same amount, then we know exactly what we need to do moving forward. So there's some uncertainty as to what that next levy may be and how that may work. So since 2019, when this levy went on the books, we have made a plan to build up our cash reserves. And when you think about your home finances, you know, they recommend to have money that's set aside in a savings account that you could operate in the event that you didn't have any money coming in for a certain period of time. And there's different recommendations depending on who your financial planners are or advisors. School districts have the same kind of thing because we need to have a certain amount in our cash balance. So since 2019 through, you know, tightening our belts, through keeping our costs down, we have slowly been putting money away into that savings account, that cash reserve, so that we can build that up. It is something that is in play, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. But in June, because that's kind of coming into a high water mark in terms of when we get our state payment and our local tax collections, we need about 120 true days cash to operate, to not have to borrow money when we get into January and February.
Let's be real clear on that. That's 120 true cash days on June 30th, assuming normal cash flow the rest of the year. Okay, so it's not no income, but we continue to get our same state funding, and everything else stays the same.
And no boilers blow or no unexpected costs come whipping through.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so so that was important because you know, so that means we can pay the bills for 120 days, roughly. That's true days cash, the definition. So if the board were to say, you know what, we want to use 100% of our cash balance, the cash reserve, then we would be in a position where we would need to be borrowing money to do payroll during those times where we will show how, you know, in between payments from the state and from local tax collections. In 2019, we ended that year with $2.1 million in our cash reserves, which sounds like a lot of money. But when you think about the district needing $4 million a year to make payroll for our 700 employees, that wouldn't be enough to cover payroll. And so at that point, that was 13.2 days, true days cash. So we have been very deliberate with that. The 5-year forecast, and we'll come back to this to kind of show this example, but when we look at what happens with the 5-year forecast moving forward, and this is right from Randy's board-approved May 5-year forecast, you can see in the red where we begin to immediately run a deficit, where we're spending more than we're bringing in if the levy fails, without any reductions. And you can see a little more clearly that, you know, in 2028, we're looking at a $22 million you know, deficit that year. So obviously, we need to come up with a contingency plan to prevent that from happening, because we can't operate that way. So with the loss of the $13.5 million beginning in 2025, we would have to kind of come up with a balanced approach where we are going to use some of the district's cash reserves and reductions to fill that $13.5 million gap. The district's cash reserve is to cover expenses in between local and state payments. I mentioned about the need of how much to have to cover payroll. And if we don't have that cash on hand, then we would have to borrow money, which incurs additional expenses to the district. And we want to avoid that. Every month, Randy does a great job with his 5-year forecast, and he shows this chart. So I grabbed this, and it shows how cash reserves change and how they're put to work at different times. And you can see that in June, when you get to June and then July, we receive payment, tax collections, and then you can see times where we're not getting any payments or any tax collections in, and we have to rely on that balance. And of course, you see in the green, that was 2020. I mentioned in 2019, at the end of that year, we had 13 days, true days cash. We did not have a cash reserve built up. And you can see the progress that we've made through the things that we've done to manage our funds to get back on track. And so that was a challenging time, and we certainly don't want to go back there. And kind of speaking of that time, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what was happening in 2019. So in 2014, voters passed a bond issue to build an intermediate school, which was HPI, and that was opened in 2017. During that time, the district had built up its cash reserves, and the decision was made when we do a bond issue in 2014, we're not going to do a combo like Toledo Public is asking for, where it's new money while you're doing a bond issue. But we will draw down from the cash reserve, determine exactly what we need, because we'll have been operating that new building, and then go to the voters and ask them for those funds to operate. So that was the plan in 2014, and that's what we executed in that plan. In 2019, we were under the old formula. And right now we have a different state formula, but going back to what was happening in 2019, there were districts, the state had a formula, and you were either a guaranteed district or you were a capped district. So if you were on the formula, the state ran your numbers and you got the exact dollar amount the state said you should get through the formula. So you were in the formula. If you were a guaranteed district, what that meant is we will run the formula. So let's say you lost 100 students, and that's part of the formula, and it showed that you should receive less money than the year before because you've lost 100 students. The state of Ohio guaranteed the same level of funding for those districts that were on the guarantee. So if you were a capped district, what that meant was if you picked up 100 students, they ran the numbers and said, you are owed this much money. However, we don't have it, and we're going to cap how much we're going to give you. Perrysburg was a capped district in 2019. And so the formula said Perrysburg schools should end up with $15.1 million from the state. But it was capped at $11.1 million. So that created an extra strain on the district during that time, because that $4 million would go a long way when we were asking voters in 2019 for $7 million. So, during that same period from 2014 to 2019, so we're talking, just a few years, we added 617 students. So at a time the state is not funding us for those new students, the same time that we are capped, as I just mentioned, and we are, calculating exactly what we need to operate Hall Prairie, all those things happened, and we said we are now, needing to go to the voters this year to make sure that we have the funds to continue to operate. So that was the environment in 2019. The state of Ohio, the auditor of state in 2019 selected Perrysburg to receive a performance audit. And what that did is it looked at the budget forecasts, which showed a deficit if the levy didn't pass, a hole of $7 million. Our true days cash, or the cash that we had on hand, was $2 million. So we didn't have enough in the bank to cover that $7 million, so we needed to make plans for reductions immediately. So that created that sense of urgency. So we wanted to kind of walk through that performance audit, because we've gotten some questions about that, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk through that a little bit. So the performance audit did a couple things. The purpose of the performance audit wasn't to identify inefficiencies. The purpose of it was to to come up with a plan based on comparables to other school districts that are our peers to determine what could we reduce to operate and not to make up that $7 million. And so that's what the performance audit did. There's a link here, and you can go out and read the performance audit for yourselves and see what it does. I pulled a handful of things to kind of remind us of what was recommended. On page 7, there were 2 areas where I wanted to highlight where they go and do these performance audits for government entities all across Ohio, including schools. They're a special division of the auditor in state, and that's what they do. And they said that with strategic planning and financial communications, they highlighted the fact that how we aligned the budget with the resources in a goal-setting process to make sure that we're spending the dollars on the right things. So they said this was something that was noteworthy, and how we communicate about the finances in the district. They didn't have to say that, but they said when we go in and review and spend the months that they did here doing this, they said these are things that are noteworthy and you guys should be commended on that. Because we hear a lot about you guys don't have a plan, and here's the auditor of state as they're doing a performance audit saying, not only do you have a plan and you think about it, but it's noteworthy to note what you're doing here. So the performance audit had a recommendation to cut 98.5 jobs and then no new staff. So that was a total of that during that 5 years, 122 positions. And that leads us to the $7 million that we needed with the levy. So that would be the recommendation that we had from them. So then it goes and breaks down where there are areas where we are above our peers and where we could make some reductions. So I wanted just to kind of refresh our memory that throughout the report, and this isn't all of them, but you would see things like, due to the growing enrollment within the district, reductions in staff to peer levels may lead to staffing levels below the peers in future years, which they would never recommend making that reduction if you're already below the peers. So on page 12, central office support staff reductions, and they're saying, yes, we would recommend cutting these positions. However, the very next year, you would fall below the peer average. Building administrator staff reductions. 2 years later, based on the projections, you would fall below the peers. Building office support staff, the very next year, you would be below the recommended peer level. Eliminate 19 for teachers for direct education. However, because of the growth, projected growth, such reductions in staffing could lead to being below the primary in some areas at the end of the forecast period. It goes on and highlights general education staff. Due to the enrollment, student-teacher ratio will change over time. Gifted teacher positions, due to the increase, the next year we would be below our peers. And then you can kind of see, so I won't read those. The auditors are known to be not very, with their language, they're very careful about what they choose. They're auditors. No offense to our financial friends.
None taken.
Although these options would eliminate the deficit in each year of the forecast, it could drastically change service levels within the district. So they're admitting, as they go through this plan and looking at the growth we're experiencing and the reductions that would be recommended, that it would drastically, and that's not my words, that's an auditor's word who does this for districts all across the state year after year. And most importantly, we talked about that cash reserve, how we had $2 million in that cash reserve going into that election and that levy. Their plan would leave us with a cash reserve of $1,987 after drastically changing the services here in the district. And so did we do the recommendations that they asked for after the levy passed? And the answer is no, because we don't want to end up with $1,987 in as a result of that and decimate the programming that we have. And we put together a committee to begin to look at what are the things that we can take from this. And then 165 days after this report dropped on October 3rd, we closed schools with COVID. And all of our focus began immediately on March 20th of 2020 is how do we take a class of 22 kindergartners who are showing up every day in person and overnight create a virtual environment in teaching those kids to learn. So everything we had to do from that point forward until we got out of that was to figure out a way how to deliver instruction in a way that had never been done, and we didn't have the tools or instruments to do it. So that became a game changer. And by the way, there were a recommendation, I believe, to cut 11 custodians in the performance audit. And we knew how important custodians are anyway, but we certainly saw how important they were, when we came out of COVID in doing what we had to do. So today, just kind of a snapshot, we have 113 students who are English language learners. So they're learning English as a second language. 24 different languages are being spoken in Perrysburg schools today. We have 13.9% of our students who qualify for federal assistance. You hear a percentage like that and you think, wow, that seems high or that seems low, whatever your perception is. But that's 815 students. That's about like the junior high size of a building of students who need free lunch, breakfast, or assistance in paying for those. So the idea that all of our students are somehow starting off with a huge lead, in the race, 1 out of every 10 students you see in a classroom is in this category. Special education, we're at 11.75%. State average is 16.4, so we're below, and that's a credit to our staff and our special education team in identifying students at a very young age and having the resources to provide meaningful interventions to those students to keep them from going on an IEP. Our preschool, they do a wonderful job, and it just continues with that continuity and approach throughout their educational journey. That's about 720 students. Again, that's more than Woodland Elementary students who are receiving services. We are seeing a dramatic increase with students who have a little more of a challenge. So while our numbers are below the state average, when it comes to students who are a little more complicated in terms of what they need, our numbers are higher than the state average, and we've seen an increase. Families who have children that need that specialized attention, they see the job that we do, they hear about the job that we do, and they want to be here for their children. So that's something that we see that. One of the things that has come out is, districts are, we're top heavy. And that's a fair statement, so let's talk about that. I asked one person who brought this to my attention, and I said, well, what is your data point? Because I think data is important to look at. And the person told me, when I drive past this building, there's a lot of cars there. So if somebody drove past tonight, they would think there's a lot of administrators here. But the fact of the matter is, I said, well, let's talk about that data. That is a data point. On Wednesday mornings, we host the business networking group. Local businesses come here. We don't charge them. They use this space to help their businesses. We're glad partners for that, but you cannot find a parking spot here every Wednesday morning. And then we bring staff here for training and development instead of having to pay a place to host those events. So in Ohio, they track tons of data. If you want to know anything about any district in terms of what it spent, what it spends, where the money goes, everything is out there. And so one of the things that they do collect is the number of the number of students per administrator. 609 school districts in the state of Ohio. The number of students per administrator, the average in Ohio is 1 per 119. In Perrysburg, we have 1 administrator for 154 students. So we have a lot more students per administrator than the state average. They also track the amount we spend per pupil compared to the other 609 school districts across the state. We're spending $172 less on administration per pupil than the average school district. We have 5,800 students, multiply that by 172, and that's what we're saving on the average. And of course, we're getting above average results. And so, I mentioned, that in the last 5 years, we tracked positions, and the teacher, we've added 56 teachers in the last 5 years. So what do we do with that step each year where we ask the 5-year incremental levy that's retiring, was $1.5 million a year. And the question is, well, what do you do with that money? And what we've done, some of the things that we've done with that is we've added on average about 11 teachers per year to keep up with growth. And you can see kind of a breakdown of those positions. In that same time, we looked at the number of administrators new to the district that we've added. And that number is 3. So when you think about adding 56 teachers, which is more teachers than one of our elementary buildings, and then administrators, that's a pretty good ratio, 95% to 5%, which when you look at the state formula today, that is the ratio that they give us money based on those numbers. But more importantly, one of the positions is in the area of student services, pupil services, helping students that need help. And we just talked about how that group is continuing to grow. And certainly the mental health issues that students are facing is becoming something the schools are becoming more involved with, helping our students and their families. One of them is in operations. We have a tremendous amount of square footage and building needs. And the other one is a new assistant principal at the high school, which has, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it could be the 3rd or 4th largest city in Wood County is our high school with 2,000. So that's where those administrators went. Our administrators do a tremendous job. Our teachers do a tremendous job. Our bus drivers, our cooks, our team does a tremendous job. And I think it's essential that we appreciate the value of what each of those areas bring to the table in making Perrysburg what it is today. We've also had some things that we wanted to address. Can the district, can't the district stop growth? The answer is no. That is not something that we can do. We've shared our concerns with the 2 townships and the city. Our interest is not seeing commercial land being converted into residential properties, and that's been what we've communicated in writing to all of those entities. With all the new homes and students new to the district, aren't we getting a lot more money? And the answer is no. House Bill 920 limits how much we can collect, and that's something that continues to be an issue for us. And the other schools in Ohio, it's not a Perrysburg thing, and that's why there's 141 districts that are on the ballot. And as we add to our, value of our community, and we have more residents coming to Perrysburg, the other thing that begins to happen is the state begins to say, Perrysburg, you're becoming a wealthier district. 60% of their calculation is based on increased property valuations, more businesses and homes. 40% is based on your residents' income. And as that goes up, the amount the state gives us goes down. So we're always fighting this give and take, and that's an issue. Perrysburg Schools property taxes, the very highest in the region, and that's false. We're not. And there's in Wood County, Lucas County, we're not even in the top 3. So do we continue to achieve above average results while spending below the state average per pupil? That's true. And so that's something that we're really proud of. Things like impact fees. Why don't we have the new people pay? Tax the new residents only. Those aren't things that can happen. They're illegal in Ohio. There aren't laws that allow that to happen. The school district can't cut its way out to keep up with growth without changing the fabric of our community. And we recognize that any levy is a sacrifice for families in our community. We know that. It's the last thing that we want to do. It's the last thing we enjoy doing is going out and campaigning and asking people for money. It's not a fun place to be for Perrysburg or the other 141 districts that are out there doing it right now. And there's no 10-word sound bites. I had a conversation with a gentleman who said, I have a family of 4, and I need to tighten my belt. A gallon of milk costs more. You guys need to tighten your belts. And that's a fair statement. And I said, I can appreciate that. I said, and I certainly know the cost of a gallon of milk. We buy milk for, what, Randy, 3,827 students today? We know the cost of milk. But let's make this comparison more accurate than what it is. So you have a family of 4, tighten your belt, we understand that. We're a family of 4 as a school district. And a couple days later, there's a knock on the door, we open the front door, and there's a baby there on the front porch. Our family just got bigger. And then a couple weeks later, we take that baby in because we have to. And then a couple weeks later, we open the door and there's another baby there. When your family is expanding and getting larger, you tighten your belts, you add more to your savings, you do the things that we've done. But there comes a point where that family, the leader of that family, the parents are going to look at each other and say, we can't cut electricity, we can't stop paying the water bill, we're going to need to get a second job, we're going to need to find another revenue stream because this can't work anymore. And that's where we are. And I know in my life, we've had situations where I'm a father of 4 children. I've had lots of experience with tightening belts. And when we've done that, we've made the decision to try to tighten those belts in a way that wouldn't impact our children or their children's experience. And we have to tighten our belts. It does impact our children. That family of 4 that's now a family of 5 or family of 6, they're going to feel it. And that's where we are. And it's not a great place for that family that is growing to be in, and it's not a great place for this district to be in, and certainly the residents of the community that have to hear this. So we want to move into how we're going to come up with these recommendations and talk through that for a moment. So in 2025, if the levy fails in November, again, we have $13.5 million that will go away. And we're fortunate that we have our reserves, which again, we've been doing that. Like the family of 4 that's growing, we're operating our family below the average of all the families on our block. And we've been doing that, and we've been putting money away for a situation like this. So $7.5 million is going to come from reserves, and we're going to be recommending $6 million worth of cuts. And that $7.5 million from reserves is one-time money. We can only go to the savings and take that out one time. And so if the levy fails in 2025, or the board comes up with a variation of a levy of a lesser amount, then we know that the next year we would have to make additional reductions because that $7.5 million that we pulled out of our reserves for that 1 year will go away. So if the levy fails in 2025, then that means we're keeping all the $6 million worth of reductions. And then we're having to find that $7.5 million in our budgets because that goes away. So that's kind of a simple way to explain how we've gotten to the numbers where we are. The board could say we want 100% of the reductions and not take the $7.5 million out of the reserves. But as we've discussed this, we understand that $13 million would be devastating to the district, and that would harm the district and community alike. 84% of our people, 84% of our budget is people. We're not a company that has steel or rail cars. We don't have inventory. We don't have large machines. We don't have plants across the country. We have buildings that are empty. We pay people to fill those buildings, and then we drive children to those buildings to be taught. And labor is what we do. And 84% of that, and I've worked in private schools in Ohio and Michigan, that 80%, 84%, that's the industry. And so that's it. So as you begin to get into the reductions, we start with the reduction list with the things that are furthest out that aren't people. And so we'll give some of those examples, or we'll list those off that will make those reductions, and then we'll get closer to those things that get closer to the students. And we'll end with the areas that are most impactful for the students. So we'll begin with programming and non-personnel reductions. And so we budget for 8 to 10 new teachers a year. In addition, we also budget for support staff each year. So this plan will say there is a hiring freeze moving forward. So as the new students from out of state, from in-state, from out of country come to the district, we will not be able to have staff to keep class sizes lower. So that will have an impact on class sizes next year and each of the following years. We will also implement a salary freeze for administrators and exempted staff. And I'm not going to read each one of these, but these, again, are those things that are furthest away. So when you look at things like professional development, we send our human resources department out to learn, what has to happen. We run, I think, the second largest business employer in Perrysburg. And, the staff, the laws, the rules, we have to have people that that have a lot of knowledge, because if they make a mistake, if we make a mistake in this realm, it could cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars or more in settlements or lawsuits. So we will be reducing those kinds of things. You'll see in the treasurer's office, software, and you'll see that as a theme. Marketing the budget for reductions. I had a superintendent at a meeting this morning stop me and say, "We are really grateful that you allowed us to borrow some of your subs." We increased our marketing and targeting for bus drivers and other staff, and we're now in a position, because of those efforts, where districts have borrowed some of our folks because we've done such a good job. Those efforts, it costs money to do those things, and those things will go away. You see superintendent's office and technology department operations. We have a mail carrier position, so if you have supplies in one building that need to get to another building, we have a staff member that goes out through the day to pick up those things. It's a pretty simple position, and it goes away. But the impact of this and many other positions, when you begin to read through it, is that will now fall in that building. So in a building where class sizes are increasing, we're reducing other positions, you're going to have somebody go from that building to go out, drive around, and pick up things, drop things off. So that will fall on the staff. Reduction, we have a contract for HVAC preventative maintenance, so we'll eliminate that contract. And we'll be asking our staff to take more of a responsibility to do that. The same staff that we will also be reducing, so their responsibilities will grow. Transportation, we have 3 substitutes that show up every day, and we count on them, we use them every single day. We're not calling them in the morning to see if they're available, they're scheduled. So we'll be eliminating those 3 positions. And then we'll be calling people every morning to make sure that they can show up, and we'll lose that security of having people on hand to do trips, midday routes, and those kinds of things, and covering drivers who might be out. The Board of Education is reducing its funds for professional development, training, and so forth. Development office, we're seeing that reduction in mail. Connecting with alumni, which leads to donations. Teaching and learning, there's several things here. Elimination of the RESA coordinator. And so we have a program, we have a great teacher who works with our new staff, 11 new staff members a year on average. They're every year, for 4 years, they're part of that new window. That's going to be reduced to 2 years, but certainly that is important to have a person who's working with them. That position will go away, and that'll shift to buildings and their responsibility to try to connect them with a mentor that's going to help them navigate what they need to do to keep their license. And you'll just see some of the things here that we do. A lot of training in-house, and those things certainly will go away. And pupil services, elimination of primary and secondary academic assessors. So we hire somebody to do testing of students, and that position will go away, and that will fall on the psychologists and the building staff to make sure that they're doing those assessments of their students, so finding the time to do that. We're also reducing psychologists' extended days. We pay psychologists additional days to work, to help students and families to do these tests. So we're adding to the responsibility at a time that we're reducing their days. The community, the Perrysburg Heights Community Reading Program that we pay for to mentor students. Some are bused, some are from that neighborhood. There's some of our more vulnerable students, 50 to 60 students are served. That program will go away, and you can begin to see some of the other things that are there. An elementary reduction of supply accounts, purchasing books, and the elimination of the head teachers and building leadership teams from someone who's outside the school environment. You don't really know what that is, but you have teachers who are, head teachers, people that kind of coordinate that grade level experience and what's happening, or that department, someone who's in charge of the social study department, getting them together, looking at assessments, working with T&L in terms of what's happening and the quality of instruction that's taking place. That and just so much more in terms of decision making that's happening in the building. And they receive a stipend for that because they're taking home a lot of work. In the high school, that getting into setting up what classes and courses and helping with the schedule and all of those things. So those are all going to go away. So that will be up to staff to do in the time that they have it. Because right now they're being paid to do that after hours and on weekends and before school, and that won't be possible anymore. So there'll be a lot of things that will be dropped or put on hold or just not gotten to. So now we begin to move into student activities. So right now we have a $75 participation fee for extracurriculars, and then a maximum and then family cap. We'll be looking to increase those to $150 per student, $300 max per student, and $450. We have about 1,200 students that pay that, so that will be an impact on those families as they do that. Transportation, increasing the walk radius at the high school to 2 miles. So anyone who lives within a 2-mile radius will have to transport themselves or walk to school. We do bus a number of high school students. Last year when we were struggling with the buses, you heard the tales of buses that had to drop kids off, come back and pick up. We bus a lot of high school students. It may seem like everybody gets a ride to every school, but that's not the case. And so we're understanding that that's an issue. High school busing is not required in the state of Ohio. But we understand in our community that if we eliminate high school busing, there are students that will not be able to get to school. They don't have a situation at home where they can get a ride or they're too far away. But when you look at if the levy doesn't pass now and then in the next year, those are the kinds of things that we'll be back discussing, because now you're getting into those things that we don't have to do. And busing high school students is one of them. We're reducing busing for athletics. So what that means is if we're playing at Springfield or Maumee or Sylvania Southview, we will provide busing to the location, drop off, and it'll be the parents' responsibility to find a way to get those kids home. So that is, what will happen there. Students who are going to, contests that are out of the area, will provide busing there and back, because that's just not a safe situation. But for most of our league events, it'll be drop-off only. No field trips district-wide. At the high school, with athletics, these are the programs and teams that will go away. Essentially, there'll be no freshman teams, for our ninth graders. There's opportunities for students if there's a sport that doesn't have a freshman team, for example, track. Freshmen can participate. There isn't an exclusive freshman team. However, those sports that are listed here do have a specific freshman team. They still will have an opportunity potentially to be on a JV or varsity team if their skill set enables them to do that, but obviously that will limit those opportunities. If we cut 8th grade sports, for example, there's no other opportunity for those students to participate. 7th grade, there's no 7th grade teams. Some teams won't, moving students up into 8th grade. We felt that there was a greater number of opportunities for students to still participate versus the other grade levels, making those reductions. On the extracurricular, the other activities, these programs will end, these clubs. These are paid clubs. There are a number of unpaid clubs and additional paid clubs that are not on the list that will continue, but these are the ones that we have identified. And so these activities will go away. In the junior high, the high HPI and elementary, you'll see the different activities and things there. It's not all of them, but it certainly is a number of activities that many of our students enjoy. Many groups have been recognized at the board meeting for what they've done in these groups and activities. So you've met many of these students. HPI and the elementaries have certain slots available for clubs and activities, and each elementary has their own ability to determine what those are. So we didn't list them out, as each activity, but it represents those clubs that are paid at the elementary level. Staffing reductions, so now we're getting into the staffing component of this. These are the reductions to begin 2025 if the levy fails this year. So let me make a couple of statements. One is that these positions will go through the remainder of the year, and then they will be not brought back next school year. So these are not mid-year reductions. These reductions will happen the next year. The process that we have two unions that are here. There are labor agreements that dictate how a reduction must occur. There's also laws with the Ohio Revised Code in terms of the timing of reductions. And for those that aren't in a union, there's Ohio Revised Code determines how we have to follow a process. All of those are in the spring, and there's different timelines depending on your position and your status, in a union or not, or whether you're a teacher or support staff or administrator. And so the conversation the last 2 days have begun with staff because there are some positions where there is only one individual holds that position. And we wanted them to know that their position is being shared as a possible reduction. There are other positions where you will have to go through that bumping process. So there's no way to know exactly who are those folks that will be given a reduction in force notice. So we didn't have conversations with those folks because it is a very elaborate process that's based on seniority in different categories. So if you were a custodian and you were a secretary, your position's eliminated, you might use seniority in one or the other. So there's a whole process that goes through. So this information is really, the plan that we're sharing with you is more or less that blueprint of what would have to happen in the spring. And so the blueprint outlines that the blueprint will show this is a 2-story home, and it has 4 bedrooms, and it's a 2.5 car garage. But it may not show that what kind of siding or bricks or exterior or what kind of, you might need to make a change interior with the bathroom. As information becomes available with retirements and other things, there's going to be things that will be taking place if the levy fails before we get to the RIF. The board then will act on those individual contracts and providing that RIF notice. So this isn't initiating that process. This is approving the blueprint, and then the board in the spring will sit down and say, now we are determining what the exterior of the house looks like and what are the number of bedrooms and bathrooms. But this begins to outline it, and we're asking the board to approve the blueprint as we move forward. But there will be things that will begin to happen between now and then if the levy fails. But the bottom line, the thing that won't change is the fact that we will lose $13.5 million next year. That won't change. So how we get to it to fill that $6 million gap, could result in different bumping and things like that. So I just want to kind of talk about that process for a moment. So we'll start with the junior high and high school. So with the reductions, we have 60 staff positions that have been identified with the reductions. And I'm not going to read each of those, but I want to, just allow for a moment to take a look at those. Sure, I'm sorry about that, thank you. Yep. So we have a .5 band teacher at the high school, and then you will see a .5 band person, not on this screen, but the next screen. And what ends up happening is those teachers are shared between, so you have a .5 band teacher at the high school, a .5 band teacher at the junior high, so that would be one position. So that person travels between buildings right now, so that position would be eliminated. So that's what that .5 means, and right now we have them traveling between positions. So the number of staff that we have in those buildings, right now we have 2 different teachers that will help service those numbers. Now it'll be down to 1 staff member, and you know the size of our music programs. And the parentheses with cafeteria monitor and custodians is the number that will be reduced from that building. So 2 custodians, 2 cafeteria monitors. So that's what that means. That's what that means in parentheses. For assistant principal at the junior high, that position will be eliminated. Who that person will be determined, you know, if the levy fails into the spring when we evaluate all the positions and all the people that are in those administrative roles. So it's not that particular person necessarily, and that's the same as a custodian. That custodian position may go away, but the person in the high school, in that custodian, could bump into a different position. And the other thing that begins to happen too is as we move into foreign language, there won't be someone to bump into because that language will be gone, so that will have that impact. Industrial tech, there is another position that person could bump into, but now you start getting into staff's certification. If they have a different certification, they can use that certification even though they're not teaching in that area to bump into where they are certified, where they have more seniority. So we won't spend time on that today. We'll spend time, if the levy is not successful, talking about how that process works and do a deep dive into that. So at HPI, the elementaries, and then here at the board office. So we'll kind of get into a summary. So one is by area, we've calculated what the dollar amounts for each of those areas are. We established a target for administrators who work closely in these areas to help come up with what those recommendations were. So the process was not, you know, 1 or 2 people in central office coming up with a list, but it was a collaborative process relying on recommendations, very, very difficult recommendations from people who work closest with our students in these areas, and trying to find a balance of where that is. The high school has more electives, more programming, more staff, and at the elementary level, you can't cut 3rd grade. So there is less there to cut, so you'll see higher numbers in other areas. And so that's kind of a breakdown of those costs. By position category, you can see how that breaks out with between administrative, teacher, exempt, which are employees who are not in the union and they're not administrators. Classified, which is support staff, paraprofessionals, and then contracted are individuals. So at the high school, you might recall, there's a drug alcohol prevention counselor that is someone who is an example of contracted. So they're not our employee, we contract with them through the county. So when you see these things and think about the impact that it will have, I think this kind of begins to summarize that. And as I mentioned at the opening, behind every one of those 60 positions, there's a connection with students, there's a value that that person brings. And the result of those positions going back, giving up what they're doing now to serve our staff and teachers and our students, you'll see that burden being placed back on the buildings in many respects, and teachers and coworkers. But we know that increased class sizes are going to be an issue. We know that we've done a good job of keeping our class sizes manageable, thanks to the generosity of our community by allowing us to have an incremental levy that allows us to add staff as our enrollment grows. So without that, and without having money to hire additional staff, and then we are reducing staff at the elementary level because we can increase class size, something we don't want to do, but we can, that will lead to that outcome. Reduction of clubs and activities, it's more important than ever to find kids a place to feel at home in school and school setting. By law, we have to identify students that are gifted. We're not required by law to service them. So you will see a number of gifted teachers that will be, on the list, and those teachers will have licensure in other areas, and they will bump into positions that they have more seniority, which when you think about your favorite elementary school teacher, that might have been hired in the last few years, those positions, might be impacted by that. So it has this ripple effect that spreads out through the whole staff. One of the programs that we had, when students go into crisis and they need outside help, if anyone has been in that realm knows that calling a counselor and getting an appointment in a time of crisis, you're waiting weeks, if not a month or more. And we have an arrangement that we're paying somebody almost like on retainer to be available because we have students that are going in crisis so frequently that we have the ability to connect that family at a time when they need the help the most. And that program goes away. And we'll be back to what we were doing and what other places are doing, which is, here's 5 phone numbers, good luck. And so that's some of the things that we do. But increasing caseloads with IEP, we're reducing some of the special education numbers because we have the ability to increase that. It's something that we've really worked hard not to, and we're grateful that the board has allowed us to do that. But building up that caseload is something that, will happen. And, freshman sports and field trips and, 2 techs. We rely on technology. The conversation before the board meeting started today is an example of we rely on this technology and our students rely on it. We're very fortunate to have a tech in every building that is one-to-one to have that ability to help support teachers and students the moment they need that help so they can get there. Imagine your textbook disappearing. Well, now we can get that textbook right back to you. But now it'll be, we'll get to it very soon, but we won't have that dedicated. So you begin to see what that impact has, and the ripple effect. So that kind of brings us full circle. So I'll be happy to open up to any questions that you might have, or move to board discussion at this point.
Sure, I think we'll wrap up both board discussion and questions kind of at the same time there. Mr. Hausler, first of all, thank you for the presentation, both for our benefit, for those that are in the audience tonight, and for the community that I'm sure will be viewing this here over the next several weeks. And then thank you as well, you, Mr. Drewer, the administrative staff, building leadership that's all here today too, for all the very difficult work that has gone into coming up with this plan over these, I would say 5, 6, 7 weeks. This has been a long process that you all have been thinking about this, talking about it, and working through it. So it is a thoughtful process. And then finally, I know all the board members here have in some way interacted with Mr. Hosler, Mr. Dreyer to get a deeper understanding, get some feedback put into this. But this is our first chance now to talk about it together as a group. So with that, we're going to move into the next item on the agenda, which is the board discussion. We can include any questions, any additional questions we may have from that presentation. So I will open up the floor to my fellow board members here.
Are we going in any particular order, Eric?
Bravest to least bravest. No, no particular order.
Okay.
I only say that because I get to speak last as president.
Yes, there you go. Okay, so I noticed that there are a lot of dings to my beloved Pupil Services Committee. I didn't see anything about, you're going to laugh when I ask this. I didn't see anything about our facility dogs. Because that comes through Perrysburg School Foundation, is that one pretty safe then to remain?
Correct. So we are very fortunate to have the Schools Foundation, provide those. So that's not something that is in the budget. So that wouldn't be something that, cutting that would be cutting money that's coming into the budget for that program. So
Okay.
that's not our funds.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure I was clear on that. And
Let's be accurate. We do pay, we have a small stipend
Okay, for forgot
coordinator,
about that.
but
Thank
that's
you.
it for
Yeah.
the dogs themselves and their care. It's all by the foundation. We have a coordinator that's coordinating that program.
okay, and that's okay though. That's hasn't been put on the reduction list. Okay.
Correct.
All right.
But we are cutting the development office staff, which does go out and find the funds to do those things. So just that ripple effect, how one thing impacts the other thing. Yeah.
Okay, so I know there's been some confusion as to mid-year cuts, spring cuts, beginning of next year cuts. So bottom line question is when, in a word, when. And you made it pretty clear that it sounded like contractual type RIFs would be happening for the next school year, 25, 26. But what about at the beginning of the outer circle moving in? That was mostly things that were not contractual. Would those things start sooner? than
Next year's budget.
Next school year's budget?
Next school year's budget,
July 1.
July 1.
July 1.
And then-
Okay, so then nothing's really happening from January through June 30.
So nothing's not happening. Nothing's happening on this list. I mean, obviously, we still want to make a look at things and go, do we really need that in the face of what's going on? But there's nothing planned in that regard.
So, yeah, so.
And I'll say, by the way, on the personnel costs, just to be real clear, it is based on contract. So like teaching staff's contract is 9/1 through 8/31. So there will be June, July, and August where teaching staff will still be paid. So you get the benefit of 10 months in the fiscal year. Administrators are 8/1, so we get the benefit, 11 months. And then classified are 7/1, so you get 12 months. So when you look at savings per position, it's not for 12 months. It's for that particular fiscal year, if that makes sense.
I do think a couple things, if I could just respond to that bullet point. So in 2019, we had a cash balance, again, of $2 million, which wasn't enough to cover a month of payroll. So when we were talking about that levy, we were talking about mid-year reductions because we didn't have the cash balance to operate. So that's why in 2019, we were planning to make those reductions at that moment in time. So here, because of the work that we've done to build up that cash balance, that reserve, the belt tightening that we've done over the last 5 years to make sure that we are in this position. We have cash on hand to not have to make mid-year reductions. So that is, a good thing for our students because they're not going to feel that. There will be conversations after the levy about the accounts and money that's not been spent in those accounts, and we make those adjustments. We have those conversations now, Randy and I, saying, hey, we're going to shut down access for anyone to buy anything. We pick a date. We don't tell what that date is because we get a lot of purchase orders before that. But there would be conversations saying, let's do, so there will be things that will begin to happen. Okay. But implementing the blueprint, construction on the house that we outlined today, we might be doing some of those kinds of things that are on that outer rim by simply just saying, shut that down, no, no, no. And we would begin to do that. So, yeah.
That's all I had.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Larimer. Other comments?
I just have, before comments, I guess a couple clarification questions. One is, when I read the staff reductions, the 0.5 for the music staff, my understanding is that there are 2 full-time staff at the high school and 2 full-time at the junior high for each of those musical activities. And that when I read that, it meant that the junior high and the high school would have to then in the future share one. So one position goes away and it would be split between the 2. Is that? Each of the positions that we have, the orchestra, vocal music, and band set up how they use their staff and share in between. The end result is the -1 for each of those categories. As we plan for next year, they would have to reconfigure what they're doing now. So when we talk about sharing, that could be the model where they have, how do we do that now with one less body? So instead of having that person planted there, as you described, there's going to be some kind of change that will go with that. So we'll get into the mechanics of it, which might be another conversation after November 5th in terms of, okay, how does that department work? -1, what does that look like? What are the plans for next year? I guess I was just trying to, for those who are in those schools, in those music programs, to make that more concrete of the picture. So since there was a question about that, that was my assumption, but maybe that's not correct.
Yeah, what we're doing is we're looking at the number of staff that are in that certification area, so it's a -1, and that's what this does. So it really doesn't get into the mechanics of who's
where.
traveling and where. It's just one, and then.
I was just trying to state what we were starting
Yes.
with.
Yep. No, understood, and sorry I
There's
wasn't
a lot
more
of
clear on
hands in the
that.
back.
Yep. Yep.
There's 6 music teaching positions at the junior high, there's 6 music teaching positions at the high school. So there's a total of 12 between those 2 buildings. That would be reduced by 3 positions, that would go down to 9 from that. With still sharing and having music still continue at HBI because they share between that building with those staff right now with HBI. So that helps to explain that.
So again, 12 positions reduced to 9 with a reallocation of how they work together between the buildings. Thank you.
Can as I'm doing the calculations on this, we've talked about the 13.5 million that we would not have next year at all. And I guess I'm looking at, we're reducing 6 million, but not until the second half of the year. We're still paying full, so we would need, I'm just trying to do that math. I mean, we're pulling, when we say the impact, we're pulling immediately from savings as of January 1. Okay, I'm watching cash flow in and out as we talk about that.
Yeah, because,
Okay.
right, Mr. Drewer, we have collected our last dollar from the county auditor related to the current levy that's in place.
Yeah, and
So our tax bill in December that's due in January will not in any way reflect this 13.5 million if the levy fails in
it'll
November.
be gone.
Okay.
That 9.73, whatever the ends up millage being, would no longer be on the tax bill.
Thereby not remitted with the January, February, I can't remember the exact timing of that payment coming in from the auditor.
Yeah, and Ms. Roland Miller brings up a good point, and we're working on the 5-year forecast now. I'm actually working on 2 scenarios, one if it passes, one if it doesn't. And that's part of my assumption is going to be on the doesn't pass, what happens next, right? And it's very easy to model. If we do when we do the $6 million in reduction, that part's easy. The question is, what's the next one, right? And so hopefully in finance this month, I will kind of be sharing those initial thoughts, but we're building them side by side. But you can imagine, just like the discussion we had to get to this point on the levy, it's the same thing, the next discussion, because you have multiple options, right? We could, we could talk about, depending on where the board ends up, with the levy failure, the 6 million is kind of the minimum. The 6 million plus the levy passing in the future accomplishes the same thing that the levy passes this year, but with the damage that $6 million in reduction does, right? Because 6 million, one of the key points is 6 million today is worth $7.5 million down 5 years down the road, because you don't have the cost increases, with having the hiring freezes and all that kind of stuff continuing. So just point out that the 6 million today is worth more than that down the road.
Thank you.
I mean, my reflection is, I think, as you read through the lists and we see the impact, I think, those initial slides, when you first see those and you think, well, sure, get rid of all that stuff. Why do you need it in the first place? I think I think about 2 main things, and I'm going to talk about the students second because they're most important, but also almost as important is the staff and the impact on the remaining staff. I think anyone in a work situation has wanted to feel that they're growing in their role, that they can meet the challenges, and it's professional development that gives you those new skills and that knowledge that you need to face the current realities, to face the law changes, the new understandings. And so I think about cutting professional development sounds like an easy thing to do, but there's an impact on that will eventually ripple to the students. But there's so many things in here where we're making the remaining work life of the staff, the remaining staff, their work is going to be so much harder at a time that we're struggling to recruit people to the teaching profession, that we're working hard on, on retaining staff. We are just, without these funds, it gets so much harder for the current staff to do their jobs, and they're already taking work home at night and on the weekends. And so I'm very sobered by the reality of what the staff who remains will have to experience because of these reductions. I think the other piece of this is obviously the student experience. I think the most significant impact I see here is on those students that we want to address that are struggling in school, that are potentially, we look at the students that are potentially struggling to graduate, that are facing difficult situations in their homes, and the well-being of each student to really reach their potential. And as Ms. Larimer picked up, the pupil services is really impacted. That's made a big difference if you look at our state report card and our low absentee rate. I mean, take away busing for some of the high schoolers and then take away some of these support pieces, and we'll watch that absentee rate really rise. And you can't learn when you're not in school, and you can't prepare for the future when you're not in school. We also, I think the final point I'd have is that the strategic plan that the community, 60 community members, many of whom had never engaged in the district before, came together The strategic plan talks about retaining staff and the importance of that now. It talks about increasing extracurricular activities for students so that they have a sense of belonging, so that they have that development and leadership experience, which is so crucial, to not only not be able to increase those opportunities, but decrease them at a time when the strategic plan calls for an increase in course options, and especially AP ones or college preparedness courses. We're taking, we're not going to be able to offer those. We're going to have to start taking away those electives. The community said very clearly we need better communication, and as Mr. Hassler pointed out, that does cost money to not only recruit but also to communicate with the community. Those efforts would be limited. The gifted services, taking those away. Really a lot of what came out of the community's input into the strategic plan, most of that's going to be put on hold. Addressing the needs of those not on track to graduate is part of that. There's just so many things that are in the strategic plan of where the district can go, but it's going to require passage of the levy in November in order to fulfill our strategic plan.
So many of the things that you mentioned, Susan, are, say what you will about the ridiculous report card, but the report card does give us a guide. I sound like Pirates of the Caribbean. It's a suggestion, it's a guidance. Like no gifted education services, bam, big ding on the report card, losing valuation there. Absenteeism going up, another one, ding, we get it again. Having students who may not make it through to the graduation stage because they're not getting the services that they need, ding, another one. So what happens is that report card, as truly inaccurate, really, a tool as it is, it's still what we have to use. We will no longer be that 5-star report card, and so people moving into Northwest Ohio are going to say, oh, look, they really dropped. Something's wrong with that school district now. We don't want to go there. Now, some people might say, yay, no more growth, but at the same time, that's the beginning of the decay. That's the beginning of the decay, and that's not what we're about. We're not about being less excellent. We're about serving and loving on our students the best way we possibly can to make them everything that they can be. And as you said, it's like that pebble in the water, and the ripple effect. Something as silly as that report card going out and getting stamped on every real estate piece of property that's in our area, and people look at it and say, oh, well, no, we'll go, maybe we won't take that job, we'll go somewhere else. I mean, the ripple effect is mind-boggling when you look at this report. And I do commend all of you in that back row back there that sweat your blood, heart, and tears, I'm sure, over pulling all this together. And I appreciate the work that you went through. This was a phenomenal effort to try and do in such a short amount of time. I just can't imagine what y'all went through to try and do this.
Thank you, Ms. Larimer.
Yeah.
Ms. Menke?
I don't really have any questions. What I would say is that I think it is very important that we keep a solid foundation to the education of our children. I think going forward, we need to make sure that we do not alienate the parents, the voters, with what appears to them to be a possible threat. And let's face it, anything on that list is going to be a possible threat. The contingency plan, I do believe, is something that has to continuously be fluid. This is a start. I do see the 13.5 million as a minimum. I think there should be nothing left off the table. We need to look at other possible additions, because we have, first of all, an increase in what we were asking for. We never know where in the world school funding is going. That's something that changes yearly. We have growth in free and reduced, we have growth in special education, and we have growth in our population. We also don't necessarily know what our attrition's going to be year to year, and that's also an area where you can look for some cost savings, hopefully. And I think the cancellation of some of those courses and some of those programs are going to have a boomerang effect, because I think you will see an increase in CCP to make up for it, especially with talented and gifted. And then taking away freshman sports, you have kids that are still required to graduate with a gym credit. And with the number of sports teams we have, I don't think you're going to be able to make up for that with the waiver. So therefore, you're going to have an increase in gym classes. I would say take a closer look in positions, look at purchase services, shared services that we could possibly do with other districts. And I know we absorbed the cost for the ESSER funds, and maybe that's something that we need to go back and look at again.
Thank you, Ms. Menke.
You're welcome.
Dr. Ruffert?
Can I? No.
I'm sorry, we're not doing public participation this evening. You can certainly reach out to myself, Ms. Menke, whomever else, to get clarification. Thank you.
I just want to clarify, did you say we need to cut at least 13.5 million when you said a minimum? Can you clarify that? I'm a little confused.
We were looking at increasing the amount of money we're bringing in. So if we're getting rid of what we already have, plus what we were going to add, we're going to need to make sure that we keep up with those increases that we were projecting to have.
Well,
with
part of
the
that is
hiring-
if you-
the hiring-
hiring freeze.
Yeah, the hiring freeze.
Some other things.
Yeah.
And, the bottom line is, you look at 84% are personnel. It's just, that's the way it is. And of that 84%, the vast bulk is classroom, student touching directly. The next layer is student support. We're at student support. So there's no getting around it. You can cut all the supplies. You can't even purchase services. The bulk of them are for special education, meaning IEPs and paraprofessionals. So you're not cut, so you cut less, you cut all the purchased, all the supplies. That means no fuel for the buses, no tires for the buses. So obviously you can't do that. It's not even $3 million, right? So it's going to be in personnel. I mean, that's just a fact. I mean, we've got to keep the lights on. We've done some things on energy projects, and we've reduced our energy costs. And we've kept our, but still energy costs are going up. Now we're doing some things to mitigate that. The next year, we're at 16 propane buses will help reduce our transportation costs. So there are things that happen, but in the end, the dollar ones are the ones who touch the students, right? And just the question is what does this board and what does the community want there? And that's where it comes down to. We start talking about $13.5 million. As we've talked about, we're talking about $6 million here and 57 positions. So do the math.
Yeah, that's how I react to kind of that first section of the cuts is, okay, take all those out. We haven't priced them out, or maybe you have. I don't recall the number, but 500,000, great. Finding out where's the other 13 million come from? Comes from what you're saying. It comes from staff.
Yeah, so, and I guess, so what I hear, the 13.5 million, I understand what you mean now, but I also know if the levy were to fail in November, that then we would reconsider. I would hope that as a board, we would reconsider what we want to put on the next ballot, and maybe it's not this, but I can't even imagine cutting 13.5 million plus the extra 2 million every year. I mean, that's incomprehensible to me, having seen the only 6 million list. So, okay.
Well,
I
and
just wanted
probably
to
what
clarify that
I
one.
didn't do a good job at the start of this meeting is kind of setting, our goal here. We do have a resolution to vote on here after this discussion, which in essence supports, I think the slide that's up here right now is what we are, for the most part, supporting. That we're going to do these cuts that that have generally been outlined, right, with some details to certainly be filled in, some processes that need to be better understood contractually, operationally, but what we're talking about is $13.5 million, making up the $13.5 million shortfall through a combination of cash and reductions capped at $6 million in this first year. At the end of the day, that is the action that we are taking here.
So in regards to that question, and in reference to what Ms. Menke was saying, am I to assume that, thank you for putting that up, because that was brilliant. You say you want more cuts, so are you saying to preserve more of our reserves and not take $7.5 million from them and move, like, split it in half, make it that we only take $3 million from our reserves and find another $3 million in reductions and add, so it would be $3 million from reserves and $3.5 million in addition reductions, making it $9.5 million in reductions? Is that what you're saying to do?
I'm not saying a specific amount from a specific area. I think this is something that is going to be fluid in terms of where it's coming from and how much it's going to have to be, because we have so many variables in place.
Well,
that we
yeah,
cannot
there's-
control.
There's a lot of variables, and this is, like he said, this is framing the house. It's not saying what our interior colors are, how many bathrooms, or any of that kind of stuff. But I'm just wondering, I mean, this is what $6 million worth of reductions looks like, however many slides that was. I mean, I kind of gasped when the first time I saw this, and you said, we're going to take $7.5 million from our reserves, and it's like,
Until
I
you see
don't
what
like-
$6 million worth of cuts looks like
and then you
as well.
see what the $6 million in cuts looks like, and I'm saying, oh, thank God, Randy, that you figured out how to build all of that up. I know that that was a team effort, and I know that that was, that a lot of stuff has happened since I first joined this board, when my introduction to the board was a tragic thing going on in the treasurer's office. And now our new board members are getting this tragedy to deal with as well. So is taking $7.5 million from our reserves, I know you've worked on this, but is that a responsible thing to do? Should we take less and look for more in reductions?
Let me answer it this way. It depends.
Okay, there you go.
Okay? No, I mean, in all seriousness, and
Complicated.
you're right, and Ms. Mickey is right. I mean, right now we're asking the board to put a stake in the ground, okay? That's what we're doing, we'll put a stake in the ground, because it is an assumption at this point in time, an assumption that in good faith, this is what we're gonna do. Now, there's obviously other scenarios, right? We could reduce less. We could operate next year with no cuts. Now, the following year, we're gonna have to cut 15, 16, 17 million to make up for it. So you have 0 to all these other possibilities. I can tell you, and again, my forecast is not done, and when you see the forecast, I think it'll help you visualize this more. Unfortunately, it's just not ready for prime time yet, because we're getting some feedback from the state on funding, which is not necessarily positive right now. We're being told expect less because they got to make up the $1 billion in vouchers. So just, I mean, we're being told that from the, from Department of Education, their budget office, just, they don't know, we don't know what's gonna be until the new legislation sits in January, we start, working on this, but I digress a little bit.
Just to clarify, the non-public school voucher system is how much overspent?
$1 billion. So let's, so anyway, getting back to your question, Ms. Larimer, and Ms. Making brought this up. So cutting $6 million next year, assuming the levy fails, and this board decides to put the same levy on, $13.5 million first year, $2 million increment. That's a big if, right? I had to start somewhere. That gets us out to the same place this levy passing in November does. So what you're doing is we're cutting $6 million with the bet that we're going to put something on in the future that get us out. Because you can't go less. If you go less, you're going to be in worse shape, right? You're going to have to cut more. So, because a dollar today is worth more than it is in the future. So that's the assumption we're making with the $6 million. It gives us a little bit of cushion. So, there is some flexibility, but it's assuming that something happens next year in 2025. If it doesn't, or if this board decides that it doesn't want to put a levy back on the ballot, then going back to the original point, we don't cut $6 million next year, we cut 13.5 or more. Right? Because because if not, our reserves are gone in a year. So we have a year and a half to play with to get this right. So we can, reduce the pain or do better planning or, whatever that is we need to do to soften the blow or make our case better to the community that this really hurts students and the community. So, all those things are in place. So the $6 million, frankly, was a number that Mr. Hostler and I felt gets us through next year. We use some of our reserves, but preserve some reserves that gives us some flexibility and gives the board some flexibility. If you go less, you're losing some flexibility. Certainly if you want to go more, depending what you want to do, you can gain. But again, the more obviously has more other consequences. So I think it's a balanced ask.
Okay.
Right? But the work is not done. I think I want to emphasize, and you've already pointed this out, is if the levy fails, we got a lot of details to work on here to make it happen. Plus, you still got other decisions to make for next year. So you're right back, so this board and we're right back in decision-making mode on a future levy. It doesn't stop. So, so we're making a decision asking the board to make a decision at this point in time, this stake. So I'm emphasizing is, yeah, there's a lot of unknowns, but I'm kind of a George Patton fan, and one of his mantras, I don't know if it's true, but I'll take it as true because I read it somewhere, is that don't make decisions till you have to, and then when you do, use whatever data you have and make a decision and move. And I think that's where we are right now. Mm-hmm. So and the other thing is, and let's be real practical, and why we're even, obviously the levies here, and in previous years, we wouldn't have had to do this. Obviously, we talk with the board and get your, general agreement. But Tom and I cannot represent this information as factual information without the board's affirmative approval that that's where you're thinking, right?
Understand.
So it's a practical matter as well as, in going back, it's not a threat. It's what has to happen, unless you want to cut 13.5 or more million in a given year.
Well, yeah, and to that point too, it's why I do think it's important that asinine FAQ aside, that this board comes out with administration in one voice at the end of the night, that when we're asked in the community, when you're asked in the community, what is the future of Perrysburg, depending on the direction of this levy, we're aligned with an answer. We've got a theory of what this is going to look like. We've got talking points. Dr. Ruffert?
So it's never easy when we talk about reducing services to students, especially as a 30-year educator. Anytime we talk about reducing services to students, it's painful. It's upsetting. It's sobering, this information. I want to point out that 27 and a half years ago, in 1997, the Ohio Supreme Court ruled that Ohio's school funding system was unconstitutional with DeRolf versus the state of Ohio. That's 27 and a half years later. Nothing's really changed. That lawsuit talked about the over-reliance on property taxes, local money, to fund schools. That was 27 and a half years ago, and we're still looking at local school districts having to fund schools. As one of the slides showed, we have 141 school districts in the state of Ohio. That's 23% have an operating levy on the ballot in November. Let's not talk about the lawsuit that's filed for claiming the unconstitutionality of the private school vouchers being funded from public school money. 27 and a half years later, we're still having this conversation. It's ridiculous. So people need to understand that part of this is a state issue. Large of it is a state issue.
Yeah.
When it's 23% of the schools in the state have to have a levy on the ballot this November. That's not even talking about spring. This is what we've asked for. We asked for you to give us what the information's going to be, what needs to happen to make this shortfall. We've talked about it. It's the reality. People are going to say, oh, these are scare-tastics. This is a threat. This isn't a threat. This is the reality. People need to understand the reality. It upsets me when I hear in the public, oh, they need to tighten their belt. Mr. Hassler gave great examples of why. It's not the same as your home budget. I hear, oh, I'm going to vote no until the city does something. Well, the city hasn't done anything. The city doesn't plan on doing anything. We've looked at the slides. You see how much land is still there. We can't stop people from selling their land. We can't blame it on other people either. But we have to come together and we have to understand that this is going to be painful if this does not pass. It's going to be painful for everybody. It's going to be painful for our kids. It's going to be painful for our staff. It's going to be painful for our community. As a 30-year educator, I know I said that before, if you have not lived through this, it's hard to recover. It's hard to recover from that. There's already a educator shortage. We already have a hard time finding educators. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that ASL position, Mr. Christie, has been vacant for 3 years, 4 years? 3 years. And it's hard to fill. And it's not going to be any easier if we continue to cut away at the fabric of this community. So I appreciate all the work that you've done and put into this. I appreciate seeing it in black and white. And I encourage everybody, whether you agree with it or not, find the facts. Go to the facts. I said in the last meeting, social media should not be your source for information. All of the information that we've talked about for the last year is on the website. If you don't understand it, reach out and ask somebody. We're here to help. I appreciate the way you put this out there, Mr. Hassler. It's pretty self-explanatory, it's pretty clear, and it is very sobering, and it's painful. And I feel, as having been one of those educators on that cut list back in my career, it's painful, and I truly feel for our families and our staff.
Thank you, Dr. Rufford. I guess I'll offer up, coming into this meeting tonight, trying to figure out, how do you listen to a presentation like this and then say, yeah, I support what this decision is tonight, because I didn't run, or I ran to enhance and make better the educational experience of our students for the benefit of our community. I didn't come in to walk it backwards, to be less excellent, to give our students, our children, less opportunity, to have our district be less engaging for those that work very hard in this district. And there's a mantra I like in organizational development, that organizations are perfectly set up to get the results that they achieve. And this organization gets excellent results, and it's through the way it's set up. And the way it's set up is through that 85, 86, 87% of the staff. And this presentation does not fall short on me, that the human element, the human impact that has been already discussed in here, that these aren't, although we're looking at positions on a PowerPoint, these are people, and these are people that care very, very much and work very, very hard for these students and for the community. So, it is not to me just, 60 positions. I'm mindful of that human impact. And also, I'm going to borrow a little bit of how you set up your conversation, the students too. And I think about the impact, as we've already mentioned, that it has on students across the spectrum. It's always, we've talked about how it's impacting the less advantaged, those students on IEPs, and that is all true. That will put more burden in the classrooms to provide support for those students, as well as the other end of the spectrum, the gifted children that also get different types of services to help them be the best that they can be. And what this plan does is it puts more of a burden into the classroom. I've got some family members that are teachers in the classroom, and I understand the increased stress, the increased burden that is put on them already through mandates coming from Columbus that don't even come from this boardroom. It's not an easy job. This doesn't make it easier, and I am certainly empathetic to that. But I also understand the headwinds that school funding, particularly of a high-growth district, a high-wealth district like Perrysburg, as it's defined by the state, not by us, but by the state, those headwinds that it's put on this district's funding. I don't like it, but this is the job. So when we talk about, is this a threat or not? No, this is the reality. I've been in situations and other aspects of my life where you've got to make cuts. And it is brutal and it is not fun, but this is to some extent, again, not what I signed up for, but I understand depending on how November 5th goes, this is the position that this district and this board is going to be put in. So do I support it? I support the process that the administration and leadership with the input of the unions went through to bring us to this point. I can support it. I can support the mentality of the chart we're looking at here, where it comes from reserves and reductions, understanding there's a lot to get to bring this to closure. I guess ultimately it's my hope, like a lot of these type of plans, that it gets put on the shelf and all this hard, thoughtful work never comes to be.
Agreed.
So I think with that, we've been at it for over 2 hours now. Unless there's other comments, I'm going to move us into section 5.1.
I have a few more comments.
Okay.
I think we need to think about if this is a decision we have to make right now. What happens if we decide and we change our minds? What happens if the state says you can't make X, Y, Z cut because it violates ORC or a newer guideline that's thrown up? I think it's important that we educate our public on what the possible cuts are. I think it should be in a list format with a ranking and monetary value with it so that we can see, as the situations come to us, how much, where we need to cut, if we need to add a little bit more, if we can back off a little bit. I just don't want to put the cart before the horse. We know where our tax dollars are going. We know the reality of how we have to deal with this every day. I believe in our constituents and their abilities, and I look at our census data. We have an impressive population. I just don't want to see us alienate ourselves with the population here in Perrysburg.
Well, I've seen a presentation tonight that does list at least positions and a theory of positions, and it does list out by building at least, including the costs. I think I have what I need to proceed with the resolution that we have here.
Do we have a resolution?
So I'm going to move us into, thank you, Ms. Menke. So next on the agenda, item 5.1, looking for a motion to approve the post-2024 election financial plan in the event of a levy loss as presented. Following the presentation, which is the future of Perrysburg schools, two paths forward, and board discussion, the board accepts the post-2024 election financial plan in the event of a levy loss.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Rowland Miller and Ms. Larimer?
And just.
Please,
Yeah, and
any other
again, my
discussion?
understanding is that we need to do this, or Mr. Drewer and Mr. Hausler can't, they can't present this as the next plan as they discuss the levy with people. Otherwise, it's just a hypothetical plan that isn't communicated. I'm not clear about the alienation piece, so I don't know. I'm not sure what to do with that. This is, to me, very concrete. When I heard 13.5 million, even when I hear 6 million, it's not concrete, and this gives me a concrete picture of what will happen. I think we still have the right in the future to, to add more cuts if that's what we need to do. But this is the minimum. I don't support taking more than 7.5 million from our reserves at this point. So this would be the minimum that I would see us approving. So I support this motion.
Any other discussion? Mr. Drew, I'm going to call to the question.
Ms. Rowland Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Larimer,
Yes.
Dr. Reffert,
Yes.
Ms. Minke,
No.
Mr. Bennington.
Yes, the resolution passes. That takes us to item 6, adjournment. Pending any disagreement, we are adjourned.
I think it needs to be